Well, hello and welcome to Transform Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined by Sarah Mitchell, our head of documentation, as well as Jerry Diudone. Diudone. Sorry, I'm going to get that name properly pronounced since Jerry has started with us, and I'm going to be talking to him every day. Anyway, we're welcoming Jerry today. Jerry is one of our customer success agents, and he had been working with Alpha, I don't know, starting at the beginning of the year, but we've just brought him on as a part-time employee. And the reason I'm saying all this is that it was actually Jerry's idea to build out an invoice system using Transform. And that's because he was sending us invoices when he was working as a contractor. And he said, well, I should just be using Alpha to do this. So Jerry put together an invoice form and Transform. We're going to be going over that today. We're going to be talking about some of the features of that and some of the programming behind it. And we did cover invoicing a bit back in June of this year. Actually, on June 2nd, we had one on building out an invoice form, and on June 16th, we had one on building out a report. The report that we're going to build out, which we won't be doing today, we'll be doing that at our next session, is going to be using something other than the Alpha Anywhere report writer. The idea is to create an all-in-one invoicing solution inside Alpha Transform without the need for Zapier or for Alpha Anywhere. So let's get started. Sarah or Jerry, could you let me know whether or not you could see my screen and whether or not my voice is coming through?
I can see your screen and I can hear you.
Excellent, perfect, thanks very much. All right, so let's get going. Let's just dive right into, let's go to Safari to Transform, and let's take a look at what Jerry has built. So this is the invoice generation form, and it starts out at the top with an invoice number. This invoice number is programmatically assigned, and I'll show you the code behind that. There are multiple ways of doing it, but I think Jerry's way turned out to be a pretty good one. The next one is the set of fields that to whom you are sending this invoice. If you'll notice, we have city, state, and zip broken out using responsive layout. We talked about that, I think, last time. We'll go over it real briefly this time, just in case you have forgotten. So let's keep going through the invoice. Then we have a section for line items and taxes. So if you're putting together an invoice just for labor, typically you're not collecting taxes on the line items. But if you're creating an invoice, for example, that might involve, say, parts and labor, let's say you're doing some sort of repair, you might need to charge sales tax on those parts. And what we've actually done, or Jerry's done, is he's created this hidden field. Well, it's not hidden here, but it's hidden in the actual app called tax rate. And you can enter into the tax rate field, and as you add new lines, you can indicate whether or not that particular line on the invoice is taxable or not. And if it is taxable, it'll use that tax rate calculation and add that into the line item price, so that when we get down here to the total section, the the subtotal, total with taxes, and the total are broken out all here at the bottom. So let's go take a look and see how a little bit of this works, and we'll start going to some other topics as well. Okay, so starting here up at the field number, invoice number, I'm going to leave this design here. This is the design here on the left. And I'm going to go take a look at the custom code that is behind this form. And you'll see for invoice number, what Jerry did was he put in an onload event. So this happens when the form is first loaded up, and that's going to set that invoice number field, also known as $INVNum, equal to now in milliseconds. Let me make that a little bigger so it's easier to read. A little bigger still, great. Okay, so basically all that does is it gives you back what the current time is in milliseconds, which is a pretty long number, but not ridiculous. And since it's very unlikely, especially if you're just one person using this, that two invoices are going to happen at the same millisecond, it's a reasonably good way of coming up with invoice numbers. There are other ways that you could do it as well, and we could talk about those in a little bit. But let's go on to the other parts of code for now. So I'm going to hit cancel, go back into code. Okay, so let's scroll down here. None of this, as you can see, has any code attached to it. We don't need it. These are just simple fill-in fields. But here we go, when we get into the line item groups, we have quantity, unit price, subtotal, and whether or not tax is applicable. These all have events behind them. And what these events do is they calculate if there are, for example, if there's tax that's applicable and you've hit the tax to applicable, I can't say that word, applicable line, it goes through a loop and it adds up all of those subtotals to come up with a total. Now, I know you're looking at this code for the first time. You probably don't know a lot of TPL. This looks pretty confusing. So I want to go to an example slide in which I show you the principle behind looping through items in a data group to come up with a total. So I have an example like that over here in PowerPoint. So let me just move down there. And I think it's around slide 280 something, 286. It's a little further. Oh, not in the 280s yet. There's the problem. Ah, here we go. Okay, let's take a look at this code together. And this is pretty much the most amount of code. You probably won't have to write much more code when you're doing TPL, when you're doing transform applications, as they're meant to be really low code types of things. But here's the code that you need to do for adding up your invoices. So let's start here. If you'll notice that I had a data group that was called items, okay? So what I was going to do is I was going to run through that data group. And the way I do that is I set a for loop that's equal to the number of items in the data group. So if I entered in 3 different lines, like let's say it was 2 parts and one line was for labor, I would have a total of 3. However, this is a zero-based system. So as a result, you always need to offset that by 1. So we're actually setting a loop that's counting from 0 to the number of units minus 1. Let me give you an example. If it was 3, we would be going from 0 to 2. Okay, we've got that set. And then all we do is we're setting equal to a field on our form called total. We're adding to total whatever is in the extension field, and the extension field is our quantity times price field. And we're setting it to that index value of I. So when it's at 0, it's going to show us the first line. As it loops through the second, it's going to show us the second line. As it loops through the third, it's going to do the third line, and each time it's going to add to the total. Okay, so that is the loop. And I'm actually going to paste this code into the chat window because I think you guys will find it helpful. So let me pop over here into the chat window. So that is a simple loop. I'm going to type that in loop for iterating through items in a data group. Now the next line we have in the code is just so that we can format it so it looks nice. We have a format number function, which we can give it the total and we can give it the output. So this is a built-in TPL function. I'm going to give you this one as well. And that's for formatting your answer. And that's also now in the chat window. And now if you're in the UK, for example, and you want to have this in pounds, you can replace that $sign. If you want to do it in euros, you can replace the $sign there as well. And the commas and the periods, you can flip-flop those. Here in the US, we use a period to indicate decimals, but over different places, they'll use a comma instead. So you can reuse those as well. So I just want to go over that. All right, cool. So let's now go back to the form itself, and I want to show you a couple other things that we did. To create our tax rate calculation, we needed to know what the actual tax rate was. So to do that, we decided there's a couple ways we could have done that, but we decided to just store that in a field. And that field here is called tax rate. But we decided that we didn't want that field to be displayed on the form. So it's possible to make a hidden field, but the way you do that is just by using an if statement. So I'm going to show that to you. The very end of the field here is our tax rate churn, and I've wrapped this in an if statement. An if statement in Alpha, or an if command, I guess is the right in Alpha Transform, basically determines whether or not a field should be displayed, or a section should be displayed, or a page, or really anything between these opening and closing and if tags. And as you can see, I set it to an expression which is always going to be false. 1 will never equal 2. If it does, we're in trouble, I guess. So that that goes in place. I could have also, I believe, typed in the word false, F-A-L-S-E, and that would have been recognized as well. I tend to do this. I don't know, it's geekier, but that's how I go about doing that. So that's how we hid that. Let me show you something else that we did. Let's go quickly into the responsive layout because we're still getting questions about this. I appreciate that. So let's talk about that. Right here, when we go down to the, let's say we want to add line items. Sorry, we're going to do, not line items, address. Here we've got city, we have state, we have zip. Now we could have had these all on separate lines. And when you first build the form, that's how it appears. But we decided even on a phone, you do have enough space, and you can choose to see, by the way, what things look like. So I'm going to choose small. So even small, it seemed reasonable to fit city, state, and zip or postcode on the same line. I'm going to switch to the medium display, and of course, the bigger, the better. So let's go back here to this size. So here's how we did that. What we did was we first surrounded the fields that we wanted inside a section. So basically, all I did was I clicked on the first field, held down Shift to click all 3 fields, hit the plus button up here, and I went down and I said enclose this in a section. So I've already done that. Then I went into the section and I told it, instead of the default layout, I want you to set it to 5 columns in width for each of the form factors, small, medium, large, and extra large. The other thing I had to do was I had to tell it not to indent. It will indent by default, and that'll move it in a bit, which will give you a little bit less space. Okay, so the next one is, let's pop down here. So, okay, so I've created 5 columns. So I could conceivably fit 5 fields in those 5 columns, but instead what I did was I gave city, I gave it 2 columns. So when I set up the city field, I said you're allowed to take up 2 of those 5 columns. For the state, which I knew was shorter, and I did that for all the different sizes. For the state, which I knew was shorter, I only gave it 1 column width. And for the zip code, I went back to the 2 column widths again. You can divide it up however you like. You might want to do 12 or 8 and give, 4 and 2 and however it is to make it add up. Okay, so that is that for the responsive layout design. And let's see what else I wanted to talk to you about here. One thing I did want to point out, which I thought Jerry did a good job of doing, is when he put together his form, instead of relying on the system to name its fields, he actually put in the field names for each one of these. So if you recall, when you set up a form, in fact, let me just set one up now. Let's say that we wanted to do an address to field. So we've got address 1. I'm just going to say plus. I'm going to add a new field, and it's going to be called address 2. Or I'll call it address line 2. Okay. Now you'll notice by default it actually just called this thing field 1. It finds whatever the first free number is, and it gives it that value. So that's, if you're doing TPL, that becomes super inconvenient because you need to refer to your fields in your code by their actual field names. So what we tend to do is do these as camel case. So this would be address line 2, for example, be a camel case example. And then with the other thing we tend to do is we tend to set preview values. Now these are not default values. That's a little bit different, setting up a default value. But what a preview value is just shows you what it's going to look like when it's laid out on the form. And I think it makes a big difference when you're putting together forms to actually put in those preview values. So we're going to say department B. Okay, great. Okay, that's that. So everything here has been named. The only thing that wasn't named but could have been named would have been the data groups themselves. I don't think that they were named, but you could do that. No, I take that back. He did in fact give it a name. Although for data groups, instead of called names, they're called array names. But that's that. All right, let's see what else I wanted to go over on this one. That's about it. Let me show you what we had done in our previous webinars when it came to reporting, because that was kind of cool. If you go and take a look at the June 16th on YouTube, the June 16th Transform Tuesday, we built a report using Alpha Anywhere. And the idea was that when you submit a record from the Alpha Transform mobile app and it goes into Transform Central, it would actually make a call through Alpha Cloud, whatever, and basically take advantage of a pre-created report that you had built in Alpha Anywhere. For those of you unfamiliar, Alpha Anywhere is a companion product to Alpha Transform. We have a community edition of it, which is free for your use. So if you wanted to build out reports in Alpha Transform, you can do that at no additional charge using Alpha Anywhere, which you can find at our alphasoftware.com website. Anyway, here's an example of the report writer, sort of similar to Crystal Reports, if you're familiar with that technology. And we laid it out with a logo up at the top, and we laid out the fields that we wanted. And then we had a detail section, which has the repeating lines or the lines that are entered in for each item. And then a footer here at the bottom. We have totals and things like that. But for when we meet next time and we show you how to build a report, we're going to actually do it using a different technology. Because again, I would like to see everything here self-contained in Alpha Transform and not have to go use another product, as great as it is. So that's what we will be covering next time. So let's see, are there any questions for today? There aren't, but there is a message here which says false and true are not keywords in TPL. The equivalent of these keywords are false, quote, quote, and quote, one quote. Okay, so this is not, so the advice I gave you back here is bad. Let me just correct that right now. In my if statement, so 1 = 2 is fine, right? But I guess something like false would not be fine. So I'm better off, I see, a blank value is false. Boink, it says it right here. If only I could read. So, or 1. So anyway, we can do it however you want. So I'm gonna go with 1 equal to 2. Anything else you want to cover? I think that's about it. I'm not exactly sure when our next Transform Tuesday is, so look for a email from us and we'll let you know. But next time we're going to dive in and show you how to build an all self-contained invoicing system. And we're going to give you the code for it so you can use it in your own account. So thank you very much for joining us. Thanks, Jerry and Sarah, for standing by. If you have questions, of course, send them to tfservice, as in transform service, at alphasoftware.com, and we will be happy to get back to you. Thank you very much, and I hope to talk to you soon. Take care and stay well. Bye-bye.